Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the afternoon work session on road design and traffic impact studies for the Board of Carroll County Commissioners. It is the afternoon of May 21st, 2026. And so what I'd like to suggest is to kick things over to Chris and everybody to run us through this presentation. And after that, we'll ask questions and get into the discussion. Chris or Brian or whoever is going to lead us off.
Will do. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Boki, Director of Public Works. I'm joined here today with Deputy Director Doug Brown, Director of Planning and Land Management Chris Hine, and Fire Chief Michael Robinson. So we're going to sort of step you through an average road design, what goes into it, what factors we look at, how does fire EMS touch it, how does planning touch it, how does engineering, and we review these things, and then at the very end we'll just touch on traffic impact studies. So, to get us kicked off, as I mentioned, I'm going to be touching on a couple key topics here. I want you to think of these as more of an umbrella as opposed to this step, then this step, then this step, then this step. So all these things need to get considered as you're walking through the design of a roadway. I think it's important to note a lot of our roadways come from subdivisions. So, as a project goes through development review process with Chris's shop, we will be looking at the road the entire time to make sure it's built to our standards, to build to our specifications and the way we want to see it based on our design manual. And then those roads eventually get handed over to us. So, we're not in the business of building new roads typically. So we do work closely with the development community and the engineers to determine the road width. So, we're gonna talk about road width. I think that's kind of where this all started. But we're also going to take a deep dive into fire EMS and what some of their needs are. As I mentioned, Chris Hine's shop, Planning and Land Management, how they roll up into this, and then traffic impact studies that have a large impact every time we put a new road and introduce new vehicles to the system here. So just kind of setting the stage a little more, this is a very high level on the different types of roads. So there's arterial roads. I like to think of these as the ones that move traffic from A to B. Collectors, they're the ones that connect neighborhoods, and this is where we start getting into some of the county roads. But I would say, I don't know the percentage, but probably 99% of our roads that we maintain are local roads. These are the ones that serve the homes, serve the community, get folks to school, get folks to church. So kind of keep that in mind as I throw out some of these terms, because each one of these road types has different standards based around it, and how wide should it be, and what's the right of way, and is it marked or not. So I frequently hear everything here is a balancing act, and road design isn't any different. We're constantly trying to manage safety, access for neighborhoods, costs of the road, and how it fits in with the community. You drive around the county, there's all different road types, all different subdivisions, all different neighborhoods, built at different times, and everyone has its own little flavor, which is why I like Carroll County. Not to go too far off topic to Columbia, some of those cookie cutter neighborhoods, it gets a little mundane for me. So being here, it's challenging. It's good to see how things develop. It's good to learn some of the history on why this road is 20 feet and this road is 40, 50 feet. So definitely a balancing act between public safety, emergency response, right sizing the road for the neighborhood, that look and feel that folks like, walking their kids down the street, riding bikes, pushing strollers. How parking comes into play. We'll touch on parking requirements. Are people parking in their driveway? Are they parking in the street? Are they taking up too much room for a fire engine to get by? And also kind of just going through the review process and how we look at this. So, I've heard a couple comments made that, all roads should be 20 feet, 30 feet, 35 feet. There's really no standard. It's all case dependent. It's all how many cars are traveling. It's all how many trips. It's all who's using what type of vehicle. So again, I'll just kind of end this slide with it is a balancing act, and we do a very good job as these projects come down the pipeline between Chris's group and my engineering group. So some of the biggest drivers for road width. Number one is always safety. Whether it's fire EMS access, sight distance, turning movements, pedestrian crossing. We're always concerned with safety, number one. You know, we sometimes get variance requests because, you know, they want to put a new driveway, they want a stop sign, or they want a crosswalk. But if we can't put those safety measures in place, we're not able to give them those things. If we put a crosswalk somewhere where there's over vertical and you're not able to see the car coming, we can't put that crosswalk there. So these are all the things that go into a good design when we're getting these subdivisions. Unfortunately, you know, most of the county roads, as we were discussing, are cow paths or farm paths or things like that eventually just got paved over, and they are what they are. We didn't have the opportunity to really put that strong sound engineering behind them. So we kind of dealt with the cards we're given, and we tried to make the best of it, and I really think we do. We meet with the community, we discuss the problems, we let them know why or why not we can do certain things, just to kind of spread the word on this aspect of safety. As I hit on already, road types, it depends what that road is being used for. Again, most subdivisions are local roads, just focus on getting people to their houses, connecting neighborhoods, getting people to work. Cost always comes into play. You know, we can make a blanket statement and say, hey, all roads should be this wide, but now we're talking about extra paving costs, extra rehabilitation costs, extra snowplow trips, extra stormwater management. So we really want to right size these roads so we find that sweet spot in between too narrow versus too wide. And then again, I'll just talk about usage. You know, what is the street being used for? Some neighborhoods are designed with traffic calming in mind. You'll see those medians in the middle of the road that's meant to slow people down. Kudos to those developers that went through that process. They put the extra effort in. There's also considerations for parking. You know, we have situations that certain neighborhoods don't like using their driveways. So, you know, we have options to litter the street with no parking signs, or we have the foresight to design for that when a project's going through. So those are all things we consider as we're walking through this process. So next, I am going to scratch the surface on National Fire Protection Association, NFPA. You know, this is really kind of Michael's forte, but I just want to make the board aware that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of NFPA codes and standards and recommendations. Everything from your generic fire code to electrical safety to tanks and pulverized fuel systems. So there's a litany of them, and I just want to make, like, when we hear fire protection code or NFPA, I just want to know it's a broad spectrum of things here. But here at Calvert County, we've adopted 3 of them in our code. So if we open up our county code, it says we adopt NFPA 01, which is our fire code, NFPA 70, which is electric code, NFPA 101, which is life safety code. Primarily, these are with our permits group. Our permits goes through and does the life safety reviews, fire alarms, sprinkler systems, things like that. They will go through that, falls underneath the life safety code. As it pertains to roadways, NFPA 01, Chapter 18, has a section for fire access roads. As you can see on the screen, these are the requirements for that. So with no obstructions, they're looking for 20 feet. So a 20-foot wide road, typically our design standards is a 22-foot road, so we're covered, right? So most kind of neighborhood streets, your typical older 70s, 80s neighborhood, you'll see a 22, 24-foot road. And then there's certain other provisions if there is a hydrant versus no hydrant, and if you're bringing aerial equipment down that road, which the particular companies are well aware of where they can bring their equipment, and they can, and they know these routes, and they know the equipment that can fit on certain roads. And the topic of on-street parking has come up. So there are ways we can regulate parking. I don't think the sheriff's office wants to run around and give no parking tickets if we're putting no parking signs in every single neighborhood. We're not equipped that way. But this is just an example of, how, if you're interpreting NFPA with on-street parking. So I mentioned a 22-foot road. Nobody's parking on the side. We got the 20-foot clear, easy peasy. But now you start, somebody has a Memorial Day party and has 40 people at their house, and they start to park up and down the roads. That's when you start to get in some of these problems. I can hand it over to Michael or Doug here. I'm sure they'll tell you the fire companies will find a way to get to the scene. It's never been a problem. There's no documented history that a company was not able to make it to the scene of an accident. So again, we have all different size roads in our design manual. I just gave a couple examples here. If on one extreme, if we wanted to say, you know what, let's just let people park on both sides of the road, we don't have to worry about it. We're looking at a 38-foot road that we're going to need. That 38-foot road will give you the parking on the side plus two 11-foot lanes, which is a comfortable lane, we'll say. But that isn't always the case, and that's not what we require either.
Quick question, if I could just jump in for a second. Obviously, we've heard in the last couple months that there's certain communities where people are parking along sides of the road that they're not supposed to park there. I've had some individuals mention at public meetings that it's a fire safety issue. Now, would that be for that private community or age-restricted community, whatever? Would that then be an issue for the sheriff's department, or who would that be referencing? Because when we had the town hall meeting down in the southern part of the county, I know I believe it was the local chief had mentioned that they had this inability to get in there, and I thought, well, I can't imagine Carroll County as a whole would allow that level of restriction because it's not safe.
Right. So I believe what you're speaking about, Nels Acres.
Yes.
And the site plan for Nels Acres, so that's a site plan, so the roads are privately owned. So the DPW's typical standards don't apply. However, Michael Shop still reviewed Nels Acres and approved it because what the developer proposed was, don't quote me on this, I believe it was like a 24-foot wide road. It's something greater than 20, and proposed no parking signs throughout. Now, that site is currently under construction, and so not everything is sort of in flux. I haven't driven through there to see if they've posted the no parking signs yet, but by the time they're done with construction, those no parking signs will be up, or it'll be a site plan violation. So then it would be a call to our zoning office, and we would go out and enforce notice of violation. We've got the power of the county attorney's office to say this is a site plan violation. Now, enforcement of that, the sheriff, I don't believe, is going to be going onto private property to enforce private no parking areas. So if there is a proliferation of parking with no parking signs, that again would be a complaint, would come back to our office as a zoning complaint, and it's a violation of their site plan. So then again, we're going after the property owner and saying, hey, you were approved for this wide of roadway with no parking on the streets, and you installed no parking signs. You're not enforcing that. That is a site plan violation, and it's creating a danger for your community and so on. So you, property owner, need to address this. And now how they address that, they could certainly hire a tow company to start coming and towing people, or hopefully they would go through a notification process and inform everybody who lives there and so on.
Okay.
But that would be a site plan violation if they were doing what was not approved.
Is that at some point in time the homeowners association?
So Nels Acres, because that's a site, there's not an HOA per se, there's a management company that owns the property.
So there's a management company
Yes,
that you
yes.
go to?
Yeah, because the ownership there is a condominium model where
Yep.
people own the townhomes, but they don't own the property. And so there's a management company that's responsible for the overall
So
site.
if you feel like, or me riding by feels like these two streets there's no construction going on, can you make them put parking signs up on part of the property? Or that's tough while there's still construction?
I'd have to think about what kind of authority we have. Now, we could certainly reach out to the developer
You
and say
can
this is a
suggest.
concern and say, this is really something that you should take care of.
Yeah.
Yes, that certainly could be done.
So yes, Commissioner Gordon, you teed me up nicely here.
Oh, man.
The next slide I have here is really kind of just looking at subdivisions versus site plans. Nels Acres is a site plan. It is maintained and controlled. I think that's the important piece here, is that owner has to control their own property. I've been floating around the example when I was working through this with staff of Nels Acres goes through the same process as a Walmart. You know, it's no different. It goes through the site plan process. There is a owner that is responsible for the property. But that is not to say that they don't get reviewed for emergency access. You know, we rely on these designers and the engineers and the folks putting their names on these plans to design with best practices in mind. You know, you wouldn't see a Walmart with an aisle that's, 10 feet wide. You know, that's just not good practice. But when it does come to fire EMS and getting equipment in and out of these sites, they do get looked at and they do get reviewed. And again, I think the subdivision is the easier one here. They are public roads. They are built to our standards. We do look at them. We do approve them. And we do have a whole design manual that we go through. We have plates that, detail everything from a open section, closed section, to 30-foot commercial to cul-de-sacs. And that whole design manual was created in conjunction with, fire EMS, with the volunteer companies, with CCPS. Everyone had input when this was getting made. We are in the process of doing some revisions to our design manual. It is quite old. So we have a lot of draft plates right now that we've used. We have some appendices that we added. I have copies of our subdivision road matrix, if you all want to take those with you today. That basically says if you have this amount of traffic and it's zoned this is what your road should be. I think that's the most helpful. It's simplified. It's easy to read. We give that out to developers all the time. It's on our website, and that really should just point them to, oh, yep, I have this many cars, this traffic, this zoning, my road needs to be 24 feet. So we do have the resources out there, and we try to get them out as best we can. I think that's all the notes I wanted to make here. I'm not going to try to explain the whole development review process. I think everyone's been down that road. I think Chris has done a couple of really nice presentations, put a lot of information out there. The only point I want to bring up about this process is plans kind of come apart and separate at multiple times during this process. So, it starts with Chris's group in a pre-application, and a developer comes in and says, I want to build XYZ, and they go off and do their thing, and they come back, and we all take a look at it. It's technical review committee. It gets reviewed by us, it gets reviewed by Chris's shop, it gets reviewed by Michael's shop. We all take a look at it, and now more comments start to get generated, and then it goes back out to the developer, and then comes back together again for the staff report. So that staff report happens, they meet at planning commission, and they have a decision to make on the development based on staff recommendations. So plans aren't developed in a vacuum. Plans aren't looked at just with Chris's group or just with Michael's group. We all have a big lens when we're looking at these development plans as they come through.
So the,
Yeah.
so the technical review, the TRC, there, I mean, if a road's got to be at least 22 feet wide, and that plan wouldn't include a road that's 18 feet wide then? It would never get to the TRC with that, or is that sort of their role to kind of make sure that?
That's the role of our staff. So, as Ryan said, there's upwards of 15 to 20 agencies that all look at those sets of construction plans from through a different lens. And so we have an engineering reviewer that's their focus point, is everything related to the roads and the storm drains of that project. And they're looking to make sure that they're following county standards and related to not just road width, but horizontal, vertical curves, intersections, site distance, all of those aspects of the engineering design, we review, that person reviews for that aspect. And the TRC meeting, the TRC is specific to bring all of the agencies together very early on in the project. And so everybody hears the discussion about what kind of issues are being brought up, right? So if the engineering reviewer says, for the most part, we've got to dive into the details, but for the most part, this design looks good, but there's this issue with site distance that you're gonna have to address. Well, if you shift a roadway to address site distance, You could be impacting landscaping, you could be impacting stormwater management, so everybody hears that discussion. Then it goes back to the developer, they address everything, so everybody's good, and then we look at it again, and we keep going through that process. So, yeah, it's a lot of individuals looking for, in a very narrow scope, to make sure that all requirements, roadway, everything is addressed.
Which one of those boxes are public?
So, there is a series, so the TRC meeting is a public meeting. That happens almost immediately. So as soon as somebody submits a concept plan for the first time, we schedule them for the next TRC meeting. So that's typically within a month of when we get a real project. Then it goes through a lot of concept design back and forth until everybody's good with the concept. We then take it to Planning Commission for a concept review. That's a public meeting. And then and then it goes back to the engineer, they develop final plans, and then the final approval typically comes back to Planning Commission for a third. So most projects go through 3 public
So
meetings.
the technical review and then planning commission?
Yes, yes. There is the nuance that if it's a very simple project, when it goes to concept, the Planning Commission can vote to have the chair
Might skip
approve it.
one, yeah.
Yeah, so it may only be 2, but there's always at least 2 public meetings.
We're also fairly unique across the state. I can't say we're the only county, but we are, if not the only one of very few that have the technical review committee. A lot of them don't do that, and we find it's a great, as Chris said, a great thing to do. Not only do citizens get to speak and make their comments known, but also the developer hears, and everyone else, all the other reviewers hear what, you know, your particular set of concerns are. You know, if it's a site distance or if it's a road width or whatever. So we think it's an extra benefit to not only the developers but the process as a whole and the citizens.
Yeah, specifically, especially the citizens, because as I said, the TRC meeting is held typically within a month of when we, as staff, are aware that it's a project. So it gets rid of the rumors, it gets rid of all of that sort of thing. Why is there a surveyor running around on this property? What's happening? We have that public meeting where everybody can hear from the developer what they're proposing and what are the kind of the technical issues early on that we're looking at.
Are you normally there for that, or the solar, you just knew they would be
Yeah.
hyped up?
Yeah, I typically do not attend the TRC meeting. My folks, I think, do a great job with
Yes,
that.
exactly.
But the recent proliferation of solar projects, before every TRC, we get inundated with emails of people that are upset about it and so on. And so the past 3 TRCs I've gone to, just to lay the groundwork and explain things ahead of time. That way my staff aren't hit with all these questions and concerns that really my staff aren't. They're focusing on their topic. They're not looking at the big overall, how does the state deal with solar type questions.
Thanks, Chris. And really last up on my agenda here this afternoon is traffic impact studies. We have a section in our design manual that goes through traffic impact studies, when they're required, when they're not required, how do you do them. I tried to summarize it the best I could in a slide without getting too much detail. But you know, this is when a traffic impact study is required. When 50 or more peak hour trips, or in growth areas, 25 or more trips are generated from your development. So you know, your hair salon, maybe not. Your Walmarts and Ultas and Targets, yes, 100%. They're going to be doing traffic impact studies. And a passing grade at Carroll County is a level D. So if they do their traffic impact study and an intersection is a D, that is acceptable. That is the minimal standard that we accept. That's written in our design manual. And I think the question that's also been asked by the board a couple times is, you know, how do you know who's in line and what else is coming down the pipeline? And you know, that, you know, we rely on Chris's group to know which ones are in the development process, which one has their number assigned, which one got approved. There's projects that sit years and years and years, and, you know, they may say, oh, yeah, we're building a skyrise out here, and we never see that, or we're building the hotel, and we never see that. We don't count those. We count the ones that we know are going through the process, that are designed properly, that we have an accurate count. Those do get included. We do provide that information to the consultants to go through this study. I think it's important to note the way we used to do it. I believe it stopped in 2011, 2012. We used to have a consultant on call for us that would do the traffic impact study. So the developer would come in, say, I'm building a hotel. We would say, okay, we're gonna get a cost to do a traffic impact study for a hotel in that area. The developer would foot that bill, and we would get a report back. That changed because, you know, whose team are they on? Argument came up, oh, they're working for you, of course they're gonna say that. Now we kind of hear the opposite, well, they're working for the developer, of course they're gonna say that. I'm confident in our staff that we go through these reports, we know the information. I think everyone here knows Chris Notchin, he doesn't miss a thing. Kudos to him. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us today, but he does review these traffic impact studies that come in. We do have our traffic engineer now that's assisting him. We do a great job. We flag every issue. And if there is an issue, we work with the developer to mitigate that issue. It's not something that's black and white. You know, if you have a failing intersection, it's not pay us $10,000. One intersection failed, two intersections, no, it's what can we do? How can we mitigate? Can we mitigate there? Do we have to mitigate somewhere else? Is the impact on this site, or is it impacting, you know, a half a mile up the road? So we do look at all those things. As Shamrock Farms, unfortunately, you know, that took a turn, but we were looking at intersections probably about a mile outside of that, saying, well, if you're bringing in this traffic at this time of day, you got to do work at this intersection. And that's the kind of stuff we look for with these traffic impact studies. So any questions on that? I overly simplified it, but.
Well, so very simply, the developer is responsible for conducting the study, but you look at the study to verify that it's correct and accurate.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And we have a lot of debates. There are often many meetings where traffic impact studies are the greatest debate. And we do come under criticism a lot of times for being hard on those. But we always look out for our customers, and we tell them what we want and how we want it done. The other addition is we don't do traffic impact studies in off time. So we want them when school's in session. We want them during the days of the week when traffic is its heaviest. Those are when we want to look at traffic studies. So.
And if well, I'm sorry, I was just gonna jump in and make sure that something is clear, because when we talk with citizens, there's always a misconception about what a traffic impact study is. And the study is looking at intersections, and it's looking at the functionality of those intersections. So a lot of people will say, hey, this is coming in, and this roadway has so many vehicles on it and so on, and it's gonna get worse. A traffic impact study does not look at the roadway and the added trips on the roadway. It looks at those points of conflict, it looks at those intersections, and how does that intersection function? And there's a correlation then to safety. So when we talk about the letter grade, we're talking about how well does it function? How long does somebody have to sit there and wait? So are you waiting through two signal changes? Or if you're at a stop sign, are you waiting for more than a minute? That sort of thing. Because what happens is if you sit there for more than a minute at a stop sign because the traffic's bad, you're taking risks then to get through there, and so that's the safety correlation. But so that traffic impact study is looking at the functionality of intersections. It's not looking at how wide is the roadway, how is it 1 lane, 2 lane, 3 lanes, that sort of thing. It's those intersections which are the conflict points. And then, as Brian said, are any of those turning movements an issue? So if you're trying to turn left onto 140 from Sullivan Road, and there's a long wait there, so it's a failing level of service, and you're putting in a sheets, how can that be addressed? Well, one way you can do that is add 2 left turn lanes, right? And so now you can get, people aren't waiting as long, and so that's the mitigation then for the concern of Sullivan Road onto 140.
That was an interesting example.
Where did you come up with that?
I just pulled it out of the air.
So let's talk about local intersections though, like rural intersections. So how do you, would you even do a traffic impact study on a rural intersection? Let's say there's a commercial development plan
Yes.
to go in somewhere, but if there's no way to mitigate the issues at that intersection, because it is a rural intersection and there's like property up against it,
Yeah.
then what is, how do you mitigate that issue? The only thing you could do is either turn down the development or make them drastically reduce it. I mean, so what are the options in that point?
Yeah, and that's the challenge, absolutely. So when a development of some sort is proposed, we will evaluate what are all the potential intersections that development is going to impact. And typically what we do is we look at the intersections from that development until you hit like a state highway roadway, right? So you can go through multiple county intersections that are all gonna be analyzed, right? And if those are on rural roads, we determine what's the level of service, and if it's an E or an F, then we have those discussions. How are we potentially going to address that? Perhaps if you could improve another intersection in a slightly different direction, that would increase capacity and people will tend to go that way, because part of a traffic impact study is an assumption on where people are going to and coming from, right? So if you take you've got a total of 100% of all the people that are leaving a site, for example, and you say, well, 20% are gonna go this way, 30% are gonna go this way, and 50% are gonna go this way. If you could potentially improve an intersection that is going in the general direction that you think everybody's gonna go, so that the distribution then, the anticipated distribution is that if it's an easier way for people to go, they're gonna go that other way, right? So maybe the distribution changes because you make an improvement on one intersection because you can't improve another one. But fundamentally, you're absolutely right. You may get to a point where there's nothing that can be done, and then you start having to have discussions about what other kind of mitigation is acceptable to the county. Are we just going to live with it as it is? Or is there going to be some sort of financial contribution that the developer can make to the overall traffic network, that when the dollars reach a critical mass, that we can do an improvement to the region? Those are the discussions that typically occur.
So let's say, for instance, you've got a conditional use case that is going in front of the BZA, and it's
Yes.
a commercial or residential. Where in this timeline where's the BZA hearing in here? Is it
Yeah.
over here, like, before one even starts, or is it somewhere?
Yeah, it's often before one.
It's often before one,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, because a developer isn't gonna spend the money to develop construction plans, even concept plans, if they don't have the approval for that use. And so going to the BZA to get approval for that use is typically one of the first items that are addressed. And during that discussion, issues such as traffic are brought up and discussed. And number of access points and all those sorts of things are typically discussed by the BZA to determine, is this a use that can be approved in that location?
And, sorry to manipulate the whole conversation here. So, and again, we've got a lot of local roads that aren't 22 feet wide. I mean, it's just the way it's gonna be. It's always gonna be that way. In fact, people really don't mind that at all. It's very traffic calming and so on and so forth. But if you've got an agricultural or let's say conservation zone property along a local road that's 14, 16 feet wide, is that a factor? I mean,
Yes.
you can't make the road wider for a commercial facility. So, I mean, what?
Yeah, and we do. There are those scenarios. So it's not necessarily part of the traffic impact study, but it's looking at the adequate public facilities ordinance and looking at the capacity of the roadway. So that's done as a separate exercise. It's not part of the traffic impact study.
Okay.
So say hypothetically you've got a big commercial use that, that we project is going to add a lot of trips, and the only access is on a 14-foot wide old roadway, right? There's a calculation process that we go through to determine the classification, the functional rating of that roadway. And if it's failing per our adequate public facilities ordinance, then we can require that the developer widen that roadway. Now, ideally, there's going to be ways for them to obtain right-of-way and do that construction, but that is absolutely something that's discussed as part of adequate public facilities, but it's not part of the traffic impact study.
That was called a functional.
It's the functional classification of the road.
Classification.
Yes. And it's got a similar rating of an A through F, and we look at a traffic count, how many trips per day, and how wide the roadway is factored in, and so on, and then how many additional trips that use is gonna add to it. And we get a letter grade, just like with a traffic impact study. And if it's a E or an F, then that's absolutely something that we discuss with the developer, that, hey, your access is not great. In order to approve this, you need to do something about the roadway.
Thank you.
So you mentioned Ethiopia Church.
Yes.
The county can't make State Highway do Bachman Valley Road, right?
Correct.
We can't tell them they have to. If they do one, can you go to them and say, can you check out people turning left on Ebbvale? Or will they
Yeah.
consider county roads, or once it's out on the state, that's it?
Yeah, so when we're looking at the scope of the traffic impact study, we coordinate with the municipalities, if it's closer to the municipality, and we coordinate with State Highway. And we ask them, what intersections are you concerned with? We don't review the State Highway functionality, that's theirs. Something like the Ethiopian Church, where the access is directly onto State Highway. State Highway leans on the county, our APFO ordinance that allows to require traffic impact study, to require it if they want it. State Highway can't require a traffic impact study, but they can ask us to require it. So we talk with the state, and in the case of like the Ethiopian Church or other projects where there's access directly to State Highway roadway, it's not uncommon for the state to say, we're good, we don't need an additional study, because they're always doing their kind of
Yep.
studies regionally, right? So with the Ethiopian Church, they said, no, they're not interested in doing it. If they did want to do one, then it would be up to the state as far as what intersections they would want to have in that study. And we would enforce that as through our APFO ordinance, require the study, and we would basically just hand that to the state and say, here you go, you got your study, you tell us or you tell the developer what kind of mitigation, if anything, you're gonna require.
Chris, can you
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong? The planning commission has the ability to ask for a traffic impact
Yes.
study at any point, any
Yes.
project, any time. So if they feel, or they get public comment saying, oh, no, this salon is gonna cause too much traffic in my neighborhood, they're not meeting the qualifications, but hey, planning commission, can you
Yes.
please,
But it's up to them.
it is up to them, yes.
Yeah, and that's in our code, that the planning commission can require a study at any time.
So last slide here, I'm really just kind of trying to wrap things up, bring us home here. You know, at the end of the day, we're looking for something that's predictable for the developers, and that's something enforceable for us. And I think we've done a really good job to date of that with our design manual, with our codes that are in place, with our state regulations that we've adopted. But, you know, just as I mentioned a couple other times, you know, it's a balancing act. We need to align the roads with the needs and uses of that community. We mentioned Nels Acres here, you know, I don't like using that because it's a site plan, but, you know, that road should be designed to accommodate that community. They don't follow our design standards because it is private and it should be maintained and controlled by the owner, but they need to use best practices. They need to still accommodate fire access, emergency access.
Is that communicated from staff, or is that communicated from the planning commission?
So there are a variety of requirements that all factor into that. So from a fire EMS perspective, there's the roadway width. From a parking perspective, that's addressed through our zoning code. So our zoning code requires a certain number of parking spaces per dwelling unit. And so then what they propose is, how are they addressing that? So for a townhome, the requirement is 2 parking spaces. So in the example there, they had 2 parking spaces in a garage. They also had 2 parking spaces on the driveway. So every dwelling has 4 parking spaces. That exceeds the minimum requirement, so then we approve it.
And then, and that was City of Westminster, but across from my son's house, they wanted to put in a beauty parlor. And the neighbors didn't want customers parking on the street, so they said, what you just said, it's 2 in the garage, it's 2 in the driveway, but you can't make them park there once it gets approved.
That's one of the hardest parts for us. Is
Yeah,
we,
yeah,
We
yeah.
don't have the enforcement to
Yeah.
say, especially on public streets. And we're talking neighborhoods that aren't striped.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
You know, a lot of them are open section, and you know, people can, you know, pull off to the grass a little bit to get their vehicle out of that travel lane. And I think people typically do that, but in a different setting, they might not be able to do that. So aligning the road need and usage, avoid overbuilding. You know, we don't want that big road. I personally live on a road that is too wide, in my opinion. I think a lot of people would agree with that with that statement, which leads to other problems. Kids trying to cross is an issue. Buses, you know, people trying to go around buses is an issue. People speeding is an issue. So there definitely is a sweet spot when you're designing roads. You know, the meandering road is always best. It keeps people slowing down, going around curves. That like wide, straight shot through a neighborhood isn't great. So you know that avoid overbuilding. Use context-sensitive standards as you're designing these subdivisions. And you know we try to tell the developers the same thing. You know, when you're working on your site plans, be mindful of who you're designing for. Emergency operations, you know, we hit on a couple times today. You know, public and private roads do get evaluated for emergency access. And, you know, I'll just hit on Nels Acres. Carroll County is getting a lot of age-focused development, 55-plus communities, and they're going to create a higher demand, perhaps, on our fire EMS, and they need to be accounted for. You know, these designers need to realize that, hey, you know, the minimum is this. We know a fire engine, we need 20 feet clear, but can we do a little extra? Can we go above and beyond? And again, at this point, you know, the way a site plan comes in, as I said, it becomes a private development. It is owner, maintain, and operate it, and it is up to them. And we can do some assistance with enforcement from our zoning office, but at the end of the day, yeah, best case scenario would be for them to work with us and talk to us and be sensitive as they're designing.
Brian, do you have an extra copy of the presentation? So I want to
Yes.
make sure Commissioner Krebs has one, so. Thank you.
I have notes all over mine already. So that's all I have. Commissioner Krebs, happy to answer any questions or anything that's on your mind. You know, I kind of gave a general overview of how roads are designed, our design standards, fire EMS standards. But you have
Good presentation, too.
you have the team here to answer
Good to
any
have.
specific questions that are on your mind. And
Well,
same
the
goes
thing
for the
I
rest
just
of the
want to
board.
make sure we do is have consistent standards that we've adopted that make sense. Every developer I've talked to says, tell us what you want ahead of time. And I want to tell them what we want, whether we want meandering roads. I mean, some you can, some you can't, but I don't see that in a lot of our development. It's like, boom, and we're getting complaints because it's a straightaway. There's ways to design nice developments, and there's ways to just approve anything goes. So everyone has said, just tell us what you want. And it's interesting because one of the ones that's come up from Howard County had someone design it from Howard County, and theirs is in fine shape because they require it. And he said, this is just what we do. Well, I wanted that to be just what we do. And, you know, you got to have some discretion, but the discretion should be focused on the long-term needs. And the community is really close together with lots of houses. Obviously, there's going to be more need for visitor parking. You either have some extra set aside, or you have the roads wide enough. If you live on a development where houses are spaced apart, hey, it doesn't matter because there's space here and there's space up here and you can navigate. So you got to use judgment, but I know that lots of communities, I know there was an article in the paper a few months ago for Tawnytown. Some of the road, they're realizing that the roads aren't wide enough. And I know Sykesville had an issue a number of years ago because when everybody moves in, they have kids, they don't have cars. Now they have cars, where are they going to park them? so they made it one-sided. I know that some of the good there's some really good developers. One is Elm Street. I say it all the time. I went down and looked at their townhouse community they've done in Sykesville. It's very nice. And they had parking on one side, and they clearly didn't just put a stripe. They put an actual piece of bricking down, so you can see, here's the asphalt, here's the asphalt, and it's like, wow, this is where you park. It's very clear, but they just do it automatically. I've been told by many that you have to be consistent and say, this is what our expectations are, and they have to be written down. So I don't want to get into all the details of it. You know where I feel about the EMS and the, and having, I asked Westminster, I didn't verify, but I asked Tony, is it different in a site plan versus subdivision? He said, no, it's the same. If you have a standard, it's required, because unless they want to get their own EMS, they're not. We need to require it. And it's not just for them, it's for our Carroll Transit. And how much time does the Amazon and FedEx guy go down there? There's no turnarounds. So they're backing up. So we need to be consistent in these neighborhoods because people expect it, and then they get there, and then somebody mentioned the call the other day with Chris and us that, oh, we're going to put the no parking signs in after the community's built. Really, it's 5 years later. People are buying a piece of property and they don't realize that you're not allowed to park there. And it's only written in paperwork somewhere that if you look at it, it says no parking allowed, and then they say, why is the fire department signing off on it? Well, the standard is there, it says no parking. It's not their responsibility necessarily to say, how are we going to enforce this? And then you're going to call, I was suggested that somebody call the police and say they're not supposed to park there. Well, the police come, how are they supposed to know there's no sign there? They're going to say, well, there's no parking sign, how do we enforce it? We've got to stop having this circular conversation and do what's right. If you go to any of these retirement communities, they have extra parking, they have the wide enough roads, they have it very clearly delineated. So we need to figure out what that is. And counting 2 spaces in a garage that you can't hardly fit a car in, because one lady over there can't even fit her 1 car in sideways because they're very small garages. To count 2 there and 2 here, and the driveways there are not wide enough, I've said, that's another issue, to get out and they're not accessible. You get out and you're in the grass, well, you're in a walker or wheelchair. We're not there yet, but we will be. You need to have it wide enough. So all those things add up, and we've got to, I think, for everything we do, there's got to be more predictability. Developers they'll step up because they do it everywhere else, and they won't have to go through all this and uncertainty. So I don't know if Chief already spoke on it. I'm sorry I'm late. I decided to put priorities ahead, and my priority was something else. Did you have any comment on it during this?
Well, I think it's clear in the NFPA standards, which the county's adopted, is the 20-foot width. The other thing that happens is under the adequate public facilities ordinances, each one of our individual volunteer companies gets access to all the site plans. Now, there are some of the volunteer chiefs that are more active with that than others. We certainly encourage them, but with our plans review person, he's the point person, and he has been on board for a few months, but his background and experience is he has expertise in the codes, and he tends to interpret them to the letter of the code. I think what we have to also do is be flexible enough working with planning as well as with public works that there may at times be variances. And we would hope that with the site plans, simply because they're building in other jurisdictions, they're used to probably more stringent codes coming out. So most of them, I don't think development-wise, have issues with not just compliance, but going beyond that in some cases. Our issue is going to be incident-specific. Many of the older communities in Carroll County were built in the 60s and 70s, and obviously our apparatus has gotten a lot larger and our requirements have increased. So there's nothing we can do about existing places, and some of these plans that have been reviewed years ago before they're actually developed, that becomes an issue sometimes as well. But we're happy with NFPA 1, the Fire Prevention Code in Chapter 18 specifically delineates, as the slide showed, what the lane width needs to be. So I think fundamentally we're where we need to be. There's always going to be those scenarios, and this is the time of the year, for example, that graduation parties and things are going on for the end of the year, where it may be a Friday night we get a call and both sides of the road there's parking, and we'll just have to adapt to that.
But on the ones that are like the close together ones, like we could use Nels Acres, it's a good example. So on that one, obviously, there's got to be there's no extra parking required except at the little community center, which is, I think, 16 spots for 133 people. But you can see where it's been waived. We don't have a standard to say, here's where you have to, how much extra you have to have, how often. So if I mean, I would think it's not practical to think in a development like that, you're not gonna have people that are gonna park there. So if, on a development like that, would we say it has to be 24 feet, or it has to be 30 feet? I mean, depending on how dense the community is, because that's what's gonna end up happening. Or you clearly have it marked, but, you know, people are gonna, if there's nowhere else to go, especially older people, they can't walk that far. They're not gonna walk, you know, half a mile away. There's nowhere really else to go. Or you're gonna end up, I mean, I know the fire department, our fire department has individuals come up to me, many of them, and thanked me. They've had such trouble in some of these communities, and this is one of them. And it's high usage. I mean, it's a high rate of people, EMS in there very frequently. It's gonna get worse as people age. So we wanna make sure that we're not compounding the problem of how things are actually used. So are we talking about actually saying, in a type of community like this, you'd have to have 24 feet, or if you're gonna allow, and then put the signs up so people clearly know.
So those are the discussions we're having with Michael Baker, who gave you the presentation on what other communities are doing and so on. So that's exactly the process we're working through right now to develop recommended text amendments for your consideration.
And also, what Westminster told me, they didn't have a difference between a site and a subdivision plan for that. They're both 30 feet. But I didn't read their code. But I read somewhere in state law that roads are supposed to be 30 feet in neighborhoods. I need to read that again, but it's a whole long list of stuff. I just would like to know what the practice is. I mean, you know, based on the reality of how people are gonna use it.
Yeah, so, and I think when in open session, you had mentioned that as well, and I would love to see what that documentation is. But I think one of the prime things that Brian mentioned was that there needs to be a balance between the different, in some case, conflicting requirements for roadway design. So from an access perspective for fire equipment and so on, wider is better. From a maintaining speed through a neighborhood, narrower is better. And so there has to be a sweet spot there between you're going to maintain access and you're not going to turn it into a raceway. And so that's where there was significant discussion a couple decades ago as the county developed our standards, discussing with CCPS, with the fire chiefs, with engineering best practices and so on and so forth. That's how the county developed the standards that we implement today.
Well, and I understand that, but that's why I think designing things with natural slowdowns, it forces somebody to slow down. The other issue that's happened over there, because of the lack of any delineation, as I mentioned before, you go over there on a busy Saturday, the whole road is parked with cars halfway up on the sidewalk, because they don't have a verge, and I just learned that word when we went with the consultants, that's a grass strip, and that grass strip is meant to be, you know, when people are parked against it, you know, this way or that way, there's some space there. And it also shortens your driveway. So these driveways are so short, cars are like, they're very short. And so all of that together, you have unwalkable sidewalks. And I was over at another community, I took you there, Chris, and showed you, in another community, and it just makes me very sad. It's a building that is older building, mostly older women there. And their sidewalk is up against the building, it's 3 foot, and the cars are parked in, you cannot fit, you can't walk
Yes,
on it. I
that's
mean,
very unfortunate.
it should
Yeah.
never have been able to be built, whether it's 3 foot, 4 foot, that's why they're building 4 foot, and that's why they have the verge, so if you're, it encroaches, and I went over there last summer and saw a lady in a wheelchair, electric wheelchair, walking her dog, she does it every day, they tell me.
Yeah.
And all of them tell me they walk in the street,
Yeah.
because they can't walk on their sidewalk. That's a design flaw. Did they know it when they moved in? Who would think that? But that we can learn, I wanna learn from it and do better, because
Absolutely.
these people they deserve better.
Yep.
Thank
So
you.
We'll make sure that verge is in the text amendment.
But, and some, I've noticed the verges, some are this big and some are this big. A nice community has it wider,
4 foot.
and it gives you more space to park your cars.
Sure.
So, you know, I've been really looking at this stuff, and
Yes.
some of them are just like this.
Yep.
But they also have the wider sidewalks.
Yes.
And it says, he said, for the social reasons, which is the two people can walk together. And somebody was telling me the other day, they can't walk their dog because it's not wide enough, because you got a dog and you.
Yeah.
It depends on where it is. If it's on Route 26 and it's just you getting somewhere, it might be different. But when you're in a community, hopefully this is where people are gonna be walking, that they could walk abreast and not have to turn behind them to look at the
Yeah.
person that's.
Well, that also gets into ADA compliance. So sidewalks for ADA compliance should be 5 feet wide. They can be 4 feet, but then every so many feet, you need to have a bump out so that two wheelchairs can pass. So it becomes a design consideration.
And
as
some
to-
of that, I mean, how
Yeah.
often in a neighborhood like this, we have two want to pass, and there's certain things, maybe in a commercial center, but those are kinds of things.
Yes.
I just want to get a wide enough sidewalk,
Yep, understood.
so, thank you, common sense.
Yeah, so I think takeaway from this, you know, our engineering group is continuing to revise our design manual and our plates and our standards. We have them in draft form now. We're making sure we're dotting i's and crossing t's. I mentioned to the group, it's been a while since we've updated it, and we're going through that exercise now. So from Public Works standpoint, you know, we maintain the roads that typically get handed over from subdivisions and existing roads. So we want to make sure those roads are being built to standard, built how we like them, built in consideration with fire EMS, built in consideration with CCPS. So we're gonna make sure we really nail those down, and then we'll be up in front of the board to go over these changes and show you what we propose. I think, you know, I don't wanna speak for Chris, but it sounds like we were working with a consultant on getting some of the site plan stuff.
Yes,
Maybe
age
some
restricted,
additional language, age restricted.
Yep.
And then, you know, Michael, again, I think, you know, fire EMS is in the loop. Plans get reviewed, whether they're a subdivision or a site plan. We don't adopt every single NFPA. I think you missed that little spiel that I had. NFPA has codes for everything, hundreds if not thousand. Carroll County has adopted 3 of them. So those are what we follow. Generally from a permit and inspection standpoint inside the house. But the fire code, NFPA 1 is the one that does touch on access roads that we do follow.
You know, and often, I mean, these are not things that we read your manuals, not that I want to read your manuals, but people say, well, we're doing it to code. But that's why we need to be looking when a problem comes up, what code is it? And unless we give instruction, I would love it if people come to me and say, you know, we think this should be X because of Y.
Right.
Because I keep hearing that the fire department signed off on these things. And they have, because they signed off on, 20 feet, no parking. So, you know, again, how do we make it clear to even them to sign off? And they're operating, and so they're sort of pointing the finger at the fire department, but we don't have it clear. And I don't want any finger point, I just wanna make it clear what the expectations are. It also depends on how much room there is between homes, but in this, there's, you know, 5 in a row, so there's like yards that are this big. So there's not even room to park a car in some of these spaces. So I appreciate it.
Anything else to add from
No?
your standpoint, your history? No. Any other questions?
Any other thoughts, any questions from the board?
Did you talk about access, I mean, entrances, a single entrance versus 2 entrances to a certain size community? Because that was one of the issues too about blocking, you know, if you have X number of units, how many access?
Yeah, so I handed out the road subdivision matrix.
Is there anything else you need guidance from us on?
We don't need guidance, no. I want to make sure you're clear on where our guidelines are and requirements. So the subdivision, I handed out separately. I think it's sitting on the bottom. We do have things in there like maximum length of road. So we know a cul-de-sac can only be so long because if a fire engine can't make it down, they can drag the hose 1,600 feet. So the supply line, thank you. So we do look at maximum lengths and some of those cul-de-sacs and loops. I did not touch on that today. Today I was really focused on road width and road design. I think that gets into maybe bigger community planning type access. But from Public Works, Bureau of Division of Engineering, we do look at max lengths of streets. And, you know, you can't have a street longer than 1,500 feet without a second entrance.
Yeah, and yesterday, we all went to, yesterday's airport, the award ceremony for fire and EMS and police, and they showed us a picture of I guess a 2-story house, they caught on fire, and they didn't know it was on fire, the whole back of the house was on fire, people were still in it, and people were sleeping in the basement. These houses, for these seniors, we allow them to be below grade, and they have a silver thing, they have to climb up a ladder to get out. I can't imagine how someone would get out of there with someone caught in the basement. And I know, I don't know if it's Howard County Code or not, but the ones they have down there, again, that Elm Street builds, I'm giving a plug for them, They actually are doing grading so they can have walkouts, so people could walk out of the basement, and you would have wide enough stairs. Climbing, I don't think, I know I couldn't, especially in a fire, you're in this thing, it's right against the house, and you're trying to climb the ladder, get out of there. It's problematic to me, these are seniors, so, again, I don't even think we should do it for anybody, but, for this for this population especially, it should be done in a way that you could access the rear. And if you have 5 in a row, it's a lot to get around, and there's 10 feet between, you can't get a truck back there because there's only 10 feet space. Truck doesn't fit in 10 feet. You can't even get a truck back there, and there's no rear access. So that's a fire issue more than a road issue, but I appreciate that.
Any other thoughts, questions, or comments from the board? Hearing none, I'm sorry?
Did you do TIS yet, traffic impact studies?
Yes.
Yes.
Let me just ask a couple questions on the traffic. So, on the traffic impact studies, we've been dealing with these for like 35 years. And who does them? I know we used to do them, the county, and the developers do them now, and they pay someone to do them. And obviously, we're trying to get the best outcome for that person. I read some of these traffic impact studies, they're trying to get the most out of it that they can, and that's their job. But doesn't seem reasonable to me. And then some of them, when they come up, like, we keep using Nels Acres, they were an F before they started. The people there complained that lived in the original units, Nels Acres 1. They came during the master plan, a bunch of them, and said, we can't get out. And it was an F. It was an F then, when they built the first 100 and some units. So then, it was supposed to be an access road that came in. I'm going to disagree whether it would have ever saved anything. In our rules, it says you may not get building permits until you have a mediation plan in place within 60 days of being finished. And I have it here somewhere. And somehow, 2 years ago, when I asked about that, I was told, we're 95% there. And they were already building. Well, how'd they get the permits? Because it's not done. Well, we're 95% there. I didn't read the rule back then. So it's still 95% there. It's still 95% there because there's something in the way called a gas line that's very expensive, and we're paying for that road. We, the taxpayers, are paying for that road. There was never an approved, till this day, there's still not an approved project because of the gas line, which is a big deal. I do not think it's going to save anything, but even if it did, it's still an unknown, very expensive cost that we are footing the bill for. It says that the project will remediate and pay for. They paid $220,000 that hopefully we're going to get back because it says we will be reimbursed. They were supposed to submit a plan that was approved. It's not approved to this day. So they gave up the first 50 permits, and it says in there, may not be approved unless the county or the county commissioners, which is this body, approves it. No one can tell me who approved the first 50, the next 50, the next 50. It's going to be built out. There's no road. We need accountability. We need to be accountable for yes or no. It can't just be, is it the janitor that can approve it? It just says the county or the county commissioners. So vague. There's no accountability. I want accountability. If we let them go forward, we'll vote for it and let it go forward. But there needs to be someone, and we're the body that it needs to stop with. Because now we're stuck. We're moving forward to try to find some answers, but we're still back to square one. And those people now, it's even worse because they have 130 some more houses, and the people in the original units are just going, we can't get out of here. They were talking 15-minute waits. It's in the testimony. It's unsafe. It's unsignalized. And we don't have a solution. But somehow it should have been held up until we had and then the developer, he's going to be gone, and who's going to pay for that? It's going to be the taxpayers, which should not be on the hook for doing it. So I just want to, in that there needs to be taken out the word county. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, some of these projects, I've read their traffic impact studies, and we look at it very late in the process. I mean, they're moving along, and then you have this traffic impact study and say, you got it. They might see it earlier, but we don't really look at it, at least the Planning Commission, until it's well into their plans. And these plans, I've become to appreciate. A plan is like 100 pages. It's a lot because of all the stormwater management. Well, you don't want someone moving that far along if they know that we're going to make them do these 3 things for remediation. What is it? So we get to the end, every remediation, like at the one retirement, we haven't even told them what it is yet. State Highway has not signed off, but their plan's going to be approved. And they're going to say, well, gosh, we're right here. We have no remediation. And then they mentioned to me that someone suggested to them that we could do a fee in lieu of. They could. And I said, well, what does that mean? Well, that means we could pay you money and you take care of it. And I said, well, then how are we going to fix it? It's up to you. No, it will never get fixed. We've got to make sure that whatever it is, if it impacts the project, There has to be a solution up front. And hopefully we're gonna make their process be quicker, because we shouldn't be 5 years. It should be quicker. But somehow up front, that traffic impact study should be done. It should be done so that it does protect the people that live there, not really somebody that's, I don't know if we can make them pay for it, or we can make our traffic engineer. I read it, and it was, the way I read it was, the intersection's an F, but if it becomes an F minus, it's still an F. It didn't change level of service. That's sort of how I read it. I'm like, so just because something's a 59 and now it's a 0, it's still failing. Don't tell me it's the same level. It was failing and now it's still failing. So I don't know how you do that, but failing worse and then having the remediation come back on the county, the taxpayers in the county, isn't fair. And I know there's an accumulation of different projects. This one's only this many, but they all add up. And I know a lot of counties, they have escrow amounts that you have to pay into a pot. Because I asked State Highway, how do you get the money to do the remediation for your big roads? Like the part that we just put in for Route 26, they make everybody pay something, so that accumulation is there to pay for it and say, here's your 2.1 million, or here's your 5 million, instead of it coming from the general tax fund. And I don't know if anyone's ever thought of that, but it's done in many other counties. The State Highway Administrator suggested it last year to me, Will Pines, that that's what most counties do, so it's not put on your general fund. And because there is not like one person that's impacted at all, but it's all those things added up, and they've all paid 0, and then we're looking for the last guy to fix it. So I want to make sure that anything, even a discussion of in lieu of, cannot be done administratively. It has to be brought back to us, because we're not going to not fix the problem. We'll make it very, I hope we have agreement on that, but it's got to be a decision that is not made administrative, but it's got to be something that we see, because for where I am, we can't just keep waving this stuff and not doing it.
Understood. Yeah, I did speak generally about traffic impact studies. Obviously, it was part of this presentation, and the conversation lend itself to it's not black and white. You do need to figure out these mitigation plans, and it's not always easy, and they can't always just pay. My example was, you have a failing intersection, give me $10,000. That's not the way it works, and sometimes it's not easy to find space to build a wider road or to improve the intersection. So it becomes very tricky, and you recognize that, I think.
Well, and when I talk to you guys, one of my people I've learned a lot from is our former planning director from many years ago, who wrote the original master plan. And they were saying when they designed some of these roads, they designed them because they had planned on this being this type of use and this being this type of use. And they didn't plan for widening the roads. They didn't plan for having shoulders. So now that when we start saying, oh, we got to do something different, it sort of violates what those roads were. That's why you sort of follow a plan, because the roads were sort of built that way. And some of the roads, there's nowhere to widen them to, because there's been stuff built on them. But we can't just, oh, we're going to put all this more stuff here, but the roads aren't wide enough. We'll just have to live with it. That has to be looked at when we're making some of these.
Yeah, and I'll reference this subdivision road matrix again. So we list the zoning type, the amount of traffic, who's it serving, and we associate that with a pavement width and a right-of-way. So our 22-foot road, kind of the smallest road we approve, we ask for a 40-foot right-of-way. So, again, I think somebody mentioned 60s, 70s, all these neighborhoods, maybe it was done a little differently at the time. Moving forward now, we do have systems in place to ensure if the road needs to get wider, it can get wider. So our 30-foot roads, we ask for a 50-foot right-of-way. So that does give us a little wiggle room for future planning, future.
So let me ask you about mountable curbs. I know we have mountable curbs in Carroll. And what's the value of that versus having a standard curb so that you can't mount it and
Drive up on it.
and jump up on it? There's value to doing it, there's value to not being able to do it. I notice in a lot of the places, they're not mountable. In these tight communities, that way you can't go up. So what are the values of each one?
I think you hit the nail on the head. They force people on the road. They don't want people parking on their verge or their sidewalk. They want to preserve that area, so they put the full curb in. It's probably a little easier to construct. If I were to take a guess, it's a little easier to construct a standard curb than the mountable. But I live in a development with mountable curb, and people take advantage of it. They do kind of try to get off the road, and I think it's a nice feature. There's a I'm gonna put my Chris Nachin hat, there's also safety factors in it. You know, that 8-inch curb could kind of stop a car sometimes from going up on your front lawn versus a mountable. So those are all the things you have to balance when you're.
And does it
when
matter to EMS? Do you know if it's mountable or not?
I mean, in some cases, it really depends on the access to that house, and we want to try to keep lanes open where possible, but I mean, our best-case scenario would be we're just shut down the road while we're.
But in
we're
some,
all-
Well, we pull you out of the front yard afterward, either
Yeah.
one, right?
but in some places, it might make
Yeah.
sense to do it when there's more space.
Right.
And in some place, when you're worried about that, it might be more sense to do a regular curb. I'm not sure.
Our
pros and cons.
challenge has been, we have a very high accident rate with our EMS vehicles. Part of that's the drivers, because we're hiring younger drivers, but as our ambulances get wider and wider, if we go into a subdivision, there's cars on both sides. And the other dynamic is, during the winter months, we get significant snow, and while the highways people do a great job with snow removal, you know, we get multiple snowstorms and we've got all this packed up snow, then we have very limited access and egress into the roads altogether. So the wider width and no cars being parked there, and of course, if it's a snow emergency plan route, then cars shouldn't be parked on there, but then you get into the enforcement dynamic of that, so. Regardless, we're gonna compromise and we'll work around.
Because
whatever.
the EMS were explaining to me, like even at Nels Acres, they've had a lot of calls there, and those people are not that old yet.
Right.
But when the cars are parked there, they literally are blocking a road for,
Yep.
could be a half hour, an hour.
Oh,
while
yeah.
they're- And so no one can get in or out. And so, because you don't only have the one access. So that's problematic as well. I mean, it's a circle, but depending on where they are, and, you know, they don't have anywhere to go. Because it's a long line of just homes, and they're in the middle, taking care of what they got, and it could take a while. So, you know, it's inconvenience to the folks, but it is blocking anyone else from coming and going, so.
All right, any other thoughts, questions, or comments or points of discussion from the board? Hearing none, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?